The dog lost his mind after his owner left. Until this child did something amazing, the desperate barking had been echoing through the building's hallways for 3 straight days. Neighbors complained, the building manager threatened action, but nothing seemed to calm Duke, the golden-coated German shepherd, who hadn't stopped howling since his owner vanished without a trace. Timmy was walking home from school when he heard the heartbreaking sounds coming from apartment 304. The 7-year-old boy stopped in the hallway, clutching his beige cap tightly in his small hands, and stared at the closed door where those gut-wrenching whimpers were coming from. "Mom, why won't that dog stop crying?" he asked as he walked inside, still in his wrinkled school uniform. Mrs. Deborah let out a heavy sigh while preparing lunch in the kitchen. She was a 52-year-old woman with graying hair tied in a simple bun, working as a cleaner in 3 different homes to support her family. "That's Duke, sweetheart. His owner, Mr. Richard, disappeared a few days ago. No one knows where he went." "But why would he leave without his dog?" Deborah stopped stirring the beans and turned to her son. There was a sadness in her eyes that Timmy couldn't fully understand yet. "Sometimes people go through hard times, honey. Mr. Richard had been very sad lately. His wife passed away last year, and ever since he hasn't been the same." The boy frowned, trying to process the information. He knew Mr. Richard by sight, a tall, thin man, always walking Duke around the neighborhood in the mornings. Lately, though Timmy had noticed the man seemed more downcast, walking slower, and even Duke seemed less energetic during their walks. That afternoon, while doing his homework at the kitchen table, Timmy couldn't focus. Duke's constant barking seemed to pierce through the walls and echo straight into his heart. It was as if the dog was begging for help, pleading for someone who understood. "Mom, can I go see Duke?" "No, Timmy," the building manager said. "No one can go into the apartment. They're trying to reach one of Mr. Richard's relatives. But Duke is suffering. He needs help." Deborah walked over to her son and stroked his straight, dark hair. "I know you want to help, sweetheart, but there's nothing we can do right now." That night, Timmy barely slept. Duke's howls cut through the building's silence like sharp blades. The boy got up several times, walking to his bedroom window that faced the inner courtyard, listening to see if the dog had finally quieted down. But the whimpers continued, endless and desperate. The next morning, a rainy Thursday in March, Timmy went to school with puffy, tired eyes. Throughout class, his teacher, Mrs. Thompson, noticed how distracted he was, constantly glancing out the classroom window. "Timmy, is everything okay? You seem worried about something." "It's my neighbor's dog, ma'am. He won't stop crying since his owner left." Mrs. Thompson, a 60-year-old woman with enough experience to recognize genuine distress in a child, walked over to his desk. "And that's making you sad?" "Very. I think he's hungry and thirsty. And scared and lonely, too. Why don't you talk to your mom about it? Maybe you can find a way to help." When he got home that day, Timmy found his mother talking to Mrs. Wilson, the neighbor from the apartment next to Mr. Richards. "The E?" 2 women stood in the hallway, their expressions tense. "This situation is unbearable," said Mrs. Wilson, a white-haired woman with thick glasses. "Duke hasn't eaten in 4 days. I can see through the crack in the door that he's just lying on the floor, whimpering." "But couldn't they reach anyone from Mr. Richards' family?" asked Deborah. "The building manager said he had no close relatives. He was a widower with no children. The longtime neighbors mentioned he moved here from another city a few years ago after his wife fell ill. She needed treatment here in New York City." Timmy stepped closer to the 2 women, still holding the beige cap he had taken off his head. "What if we can get inside and give Duke some food?" "We can't do that, sweetheart," Deborah replied immediately. "That would be trespassing. We have to wait for a legal decision. But he'll get sick if he doesn't eat, or even—" Timmy couldn't finish the sentence. The word in his mind was too heavy for a 7-year-old to say. Mrs. Wilson crouched down to his level. "Listen, dear, I understand your concern. I'm very upset about this too. But unfortunately, we can't do anything until someone responsible shows up." That night, the silence was even more unsettling than the barking. Timmy woke up in the middle of the night and realized he couldn't hear any sounds coming from apartment 304 anymore. The boy's heart raced. Had Duke? No, he couldn't even think it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Timmy didn't even wait for breakfast. He rushed into the hallway and pressed his ear against Mr. Richards' apartment door. After a few agonizing seconds of silence, he heard a faint, almost inaudible whimper. Duke was still alive, but clearly very weak. "Mom!" Timmy shouted, running back home. "Duke's still alive, but he's really weak." Deborah was getting ready for work, wearing her blue cleaning uniform and organizing her supplies in her bag. "Timmy, I have to work. I can't be late for Mrs. Stewart's house." "But what about Duke?" The building manager said someone from the city animal shelter would come for him this morning. Timmy's chest tightened even more. He knew the city shelters were always overcrowded, and they couldn't always take good care of all the animals. Besides, Duke was a big dog, which would make adoption harder. At school that day, Timmy could barely focus. During recess, he sat alone under the courtyard tree, fiddling with the beige cap he always carried with him. It was a gift from his father before he left to work in another city 2 years ago. "Why are you so quiet today?" asked Ashley, his classmate, a girl with curly hair and a warm smile. "It's because of a dog. He's suffering and no one can help." "What do you mean?" Timmy told Ashley the whole story, and she listened carefully, nodding with concern. "My grandma always says that when you really want to help someone, there's always a way," Ashley said. "Maybe you just need to think harder." Those words echoed in Timmy's mind all afternoon. When he got home, he heard voices in the hallway. 2 women he didn't recognize were talking to the building manager, Mrs. Collins, a middle-aged woman with dyed blonde hair. "The animal is clearly abandoned," said one of them, a young woman in a green lab coat. "We'll have to sedate him to get him out." "How long do you think he'll stay at the shelter?" asked Mrs. Collins. "Hard to say. An adult German Shepherd isn't easy to adopt, and given his emotional state, it could take months." Timmy's chest ached. Months in the shelter would be terrible for Duke, who was already devastated by the loss of his Richard. The boy ran home and found his mother preparing dinner. "Mom, they're taking Duke to the shelter." "I know, sweetheart. It's the best they can do for now." "But it's not. Duke will be even sadder there. He needs someone to take care of him, someone who understands he's hurting." Deborah stopped peeling the potatoes and looked at her son. In Timmy's eyes, she saw a determination that surprised her. It was an unusual emotional maturity for a 7-year-old. "And what do you suggest we do, Timmy?" "We can adopt him. We can take care of him until his Richard comes back." "Honey, we don't know if his Richard will come back. And besides, we can't afford to keep a big dog. The food, medicine, vet bills, it's too expensive. But we can't let him suffer like this." That night, Timmy went to bed with a heavy heart once again. He pictured Duke alone in that apartment, not understanding why his world had suddenly fallen apart. The boy knew that feeling of abandonment all too well. When his father had left to work in another city, promising to return soon, Timmy had also felt like a part of him had been torn away. The next morning, a sunny Saturday, Timmy woke up to the sound of movement in the hallway. It was the women from the shelter, preparing to enter apartment 304. The boy quickly got dressed and stepped out to watch. The superintendent opened the door with the spare key. The smell that came out of the apartment made everyone step back. It was the scent of accumulated sadness, of a home that had lost its soul. Duke was lying in the living room near the door, as if waiting forever for his owner to return. When he saw strangers entering, the dog weakly lifted his head and let out a low growl, more out of fear than aggression. "Easy, boy," said the vet, approaching slowly. "No one's going to hurt you." But Duke backed away, dragging his weakened body under the coffee table. His eyes were dull without the spark of life Timmy remembered seeing during their morning walks. "It'll be hard to get him out of here without sedation," the vet's assistant remarked. That's when Timmy got an idea. Without asking for permission, the boy stepped into the apartment and slowly moved toward Duke. All the women tensed, ready to intervene if needed. "Hi, Duke," Timmy said softly, crouching at a safe distance. "I'm your neighbor. Do you remember me?" The dog stopped growling and stared at the boy intently. There was something familiar about that young, gentle voice. "I know you," Miss your Richard. I miss my dad sometimes too. Timmy slowly reached out, still holding the beige cap. Duke sniffed the air, catching the boy's scent mixed with something else. Do you smell my cap? My dad gave it to me before he left. Sometimes I hug it when I'm sad. Duke moved a little closer, driven by instinctive curiosity. The boy stayed still, letting the dog sniff him. I wish I could help you, Duke, but the grown-ups say I can't. Then something unexpected happened. Duke came all the way to Timmy and rested his big, heavy head on the boy's knee. It was as if the dog recognized a kindred spirit, someone who also knew the pain of separation. Wow, the vet murmured. I've never seen a traumatized animal respond to a child like that. Timmy carefully stroked Duke's head, feeling the tremble of a broken heart under his small hands. Do you want to come with me, Duke? I promise I'll take care of you. The dog lifted his eyes to the boy, and for a brief moment it seemed like a spark of hope flickered in that dull gaze. But reality soon set in. Deborah appeared at the door with a worried expression. Timmy, get away from there right now. You could get hurt. He won't hurt me, Mom. Look how calm he is with me. Even so, you need to step back. Let the professionals do their job. Reluctantly, Timmy moved away from Duke. The dog tried to follow him but was too weak to stand up completely. The boy felt tears burning his eyes as he watched Duke lie back down, defeated. I'm sorry, Duke. I really wanted to help you. The vet managed to sedate Duke with a quick injection. Within minutes, the dog was unconscious, and 2 people carried him on a stretcher to the shelter van. Timmy watched it all from the hallway window, his heart shattered. It felt like watching a friend being taken away, powerless to stop it in C. The days that followed, the building was strangely quiet. The neighbors remarked how relieved they were not to hear the desperate barking anymore, but Timmy missed those sounds. At least they had meant Duke was still fighting, still had hope. On Monday, Timmy returned to school with a new determination. During writing class, when Mrs. Thompson asked the students to write about a moment that changed my life, Timmy wrote about Duke. On Saturday, I met a dog who lost his owner. He was so sad, just like I get when my dad can't visit. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't. It made me think maybe I could help other animals who are suffering. Mrs. Thompson read the essay carefully and was impressed by the boy's sensitivity. Timmy, would you like to share your essay with the class? The boy agreed, and when he finished reading, several classmates asked questions about Duke. Ashley raised her hand. Teacher, can't we do something to help that dog? What do you mean, Ashley? I don't know, maybe raise money for the shelter or visit the animals there. Mrs. Thompson grew thoughtful. It was an interesting idea and could be a good lesson. In citizenship for the children. I'll talk to the school administration. Maybe we can organize a campaign to help abandoned animals. Timmy felt a spark of hope in his chest. Maybe there was still a way to help Duke after all. That afternoon, when he got home, Timmy found his mother talking to Mrs. Wilson in the hallway. Both women seemed agitated. What happened? The boy asked. It's about Mr. Richard, replied Mrs. Wilson. Someone saw him at the bus station this morning. Timmy's heart raced. He came back? We don't know. The person who saw him said he looked like he was returning from a trip, but no one saw him come into the building. Deborah shook her head. Maybe he came to get some things and left again. Or maybe he doesn't even know Duke was taken to the shelter, Timmy suggested. The 2 women looked at the boy, considering the possibility. You might be right, sweetheart, Deborah said. If he arrived today and saw the empty apartment... We have to find him, Timmy exclaimed. Duke must be waiting at the shelter, and Mr. Richard must be looking for him. Mrs. Wilson sighed. But how do we find him? New York City is huge. Timmy grew thoughtful. There had to be a way to reunite Duke and Mr. Richard. But how could a 7-year-old do that? That night, Timmy could barely eat dinner. He kept imagining Duke at the shelter, alone in a cage, not understanding why his world had become even more confusing. And somewhere in the city, Mr. Richard was probably desperate, searching for his only companion. On Tuesday, Mrs. Thompson had news for the class. I spoke with the principal, and she approved our campaign to help abandoned animals. We're visiting the shelter next Friday. The whole class cheered, but no one was more excited than Timmy. He'd finally have the chance to see Duke again. For the rest of the week, the kids organized donations. They brought pet food, blankets, and toys for dogs and cats. Timmy contributed the little money he had saved and an old t-shirt of his, hoping Duke could catch his scent. On Friday, the school bus stopped in front of the city animal shelter. It was a large place, but clearly in need of more resources. Dozens of kennels and cages filled the space, and the sound of barks and meows filled the air. The shelter director, Mrs. Patterson, a 50-year-old woman with short hair and glasses, greeted the group of children. "Welcome. It's always a joy to have visitors, especially kids. The animals love attention." Timmy was eager to find Duke, but tried to temper his expectations. The shelter was big, and maybe Duke was in an area they couldn't visit. Mrs. Patterson led the group to see the puppies first, housed in a brighter, livelier section. The kids were enchanted by the playful little animals, but Timmy had only one thing on his mind. "Mrs. Patterson, did you get a golden German shepherd last Saturday?" The woman paused and looked at him carefully. "Duke, you know him?" "Yes, he was my neighbor." "How is he?" Mrs. Patterson's expression grew serious. "To be honest, not well. He hasn't been eating properly and gets very agitated. He's clearly grieving his owner." "Can I see him?" Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Well, he's in a separate area because he was too stressed around the other animals. But maybe a quick visit." She took Timmy, accompanied by Mrs. Thompson, to a quieter part of the shelter. There was Duke lying in a single kennel, his gaze distant. When he spotted Timmy, the dog immediately lifted his head. His eyes, dull since arriving at the shelter, suddenly brightened. "Duke!" Timmy called, stepping closer to the gate. The dog quickly stood and came to the front of the kennel, placing his paws on the gate and trying to get closer to the boy. "He remembers you," Mrs. Patterson observed, surprised. "Since he got here, this is the first time I've seen him show any interest in anything." Timmy slipped his small fingers through the bars and stroked Duke's snout. "Hey, buddy, how are you?" Duke made a low sound, almost like a whimper of relief. It was as if he'd finally found a connection to the world again. "Mrs. Patterson, is there any news about his owner?" Timmy asked. "Unfortunately, no. It's been a week, and no one's come looking for him. By law, after 30 days, he'll be available for adoption. But what if his owner comes back after that? If he can prove he's the real owner, we can return Duke. But that rarely happens." Timmy's chest tightened. 30 days felt like forever, and there was no guarantee Mr. Richard would show up by then. On the bus ride back to school, Timmy stayed quiet, thinking about everything that had happened. Duke was suffering at the shelter, Mr. Richard was missing, somewhere in New York City, and he was just a kid with no power to change the situation. When he got home that afternoon, he found his mother more worked up than usual. "Timmy, you won't believe what happened today." "What, Mom?" "Mr. Richard showed up. He was here in the building looking for Duke." Timmy's heart leaped. "Where? Is he now?" "We don't know." Mrs. Wilson talked to him briefly. She said he looked terrible, thin and worn out. When he found out Duke had been taken to the shelter, he was devastated. "And why didn't he go get Duke?" Deborah sighed. "According to Mrs. Wilson, he said he can no longer take care of an animal. He lost his job and is going through serious financial troubles. He came to pick up some things from the apartment to sell." Timmy felt as if the world had collapsed on him. Mr. Richard had returned, but he couldn't keep Duke, and Duke would continue suffering at the shelter, not understanding why he'd been abandoned twice. "But where is Mr. Richard living now?" "No one knows. He didn't want to say. He just took a suitcase with some clothes and left again." That night, Timmy went to bed with a heavy heart. He stared at the beige cap he always kept by his bedside, thinking about his conversation with Duke at the shelter. The dog had been so happy to see him, but Timmy hadn't been able to do anything to fix his situation. On Saturday morning, Timmy woke up with renewed determination. He couldn't give up on Duke. There had to be a way to help. "Mom, can I go back to the shelter today?" "Timmy, the school visit already happened. We can't keep bothering the staff there." "But Duke was happy when he saw me. Maybe if I visited him more, he'd be less sad." Deborah looked at her son, seeing the determination in his eyes. "And how do you plan to get there? It's far from here. We can take the bus." "Please, Mom, I promise I won't bother anyone." After much insistence, Deborah agreed to take her son to the shelter. It was her day off, and she too had been moved by Duke's story. When they arrived at the shelter, Mrs. Patterson was surprised to see them. "You came back. Duke will be so happy." "How is he?" Timmy asked immediately. "A little better since your visit yesterday. He even ate some food, which he hadn't done in days." When Duke saw Timmy again, his reaction was even stronger than the first time. The dog wouldn't stop wagging his tail and making little happy sounds. "Can I go inside his kennel?" Timmy asked. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Well, we normally don't allow that with visitors, but Duke clearly has a special connection with you." She opened the kennel door and Duke ran out to hug Timmy with his front paws. The boy laughed and hugged the dog back, his heart warm with emotion. "Hi, Duke. I promised I'd come back, didn't I?" Duke enthusiastically licked Timmy's face, as if trying to say he was grateful not to be forgotten. "You know, Duke, I'm trying to find your Mr. Richard. He came back looking for you, but he's going through a tough time." Deborah watched the interaction between her son and the dog with emotion. It was clear there was a special bond between them. "Mrs. Patterson," Deborah said, "how much does it cost to care for a dog like Duke here at the shelter?" "Per month, between food, medicine, and vet care, about $200. Deborah did the math in her head. That was nearly 2/3 of her monthly income. Impossible. What if someone wanted to visit Duke regularly? Would that be allowed? Of course. Visitors are good for the animals, especially for Duke, who's clearly depressed. Timmy had an idea. "Mum, what if I came here every Saturday to visit Duke, until Mr. Richard can take him back?" "Honey, that's 2 bus tickets every week, and you have to study, do homework. I can do all that and still have time to visit Duke. Please, Mum." Deborah looked at her son hugging Duke and felt her heart soften. Maybe she could make this small financial sacrifice if it brought Timmy so much joy. "All right, we can. Try coming here once a week." Timmy cheered and hugged Duke even tighter. "Did you hear that, Duke? I'm going to visit you every week." Duke seemed to understand the boy's excitement and wagged his tail even harder. During the following weeks, Timmy kept his promise religiously. Every Saturday, he and Deborah made the trip to the shelter to visit Duke. The dog always greeted them with great enthusiasm, and with each visit, he seemed to get a little better. Mrs. Patterson began telling other staff members about that special boy who had brought hope back to Duke's eyes. "It's amazing," she said. "Duke eats better on visiting days, plays more, even interacts better with the other staff." On the 4th Saturday of visits, Timmy brought a surprise for Duke, the beige cap he always carried. "Look what I brought for you, Duke. It's my special cap. My dad gave it to me before he left." Timmy placed the cap on Duke's head, and the dog stood still as if understanding it was something important. "Now you have something special too, to remind you of someone who loves you." Duke shook his head, making the cap fall, but then gently picked it up with his mouth and brought it back to Timmy as if playing. "He knows it's his," Deborah observed. Moved. That day, as they were getting ready to leave, Mrs. Patterson called Deborah aside for a private conversation. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." "About Duke, I'm worried. It's been almost 3 weeks since he's been here, and there's been no interest in him besides your visits." "What happens after 30 days?" "Well, legally, he'll be available for adoption, but an adult German Shepherd with emotional trauma, it'll be very hard to find him a family." Deborah felt her heart tighten. "And if no one adopts him?" Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. "We try to keep animals as long as possible, but eventually we have to make tough decisions." Deborah understood what she was implying without hearing the words. "How much time would he have?" "If no one comes forward to adopt him in the next 2 months, maybe 3. That night, Deborah lay awake, thinking about her conversation with Mrs. Patterson. She couldn't tell Timmy about that terrible possibility. The boy would be devastated. The next day, Sunday, Deborah decided to do something she normally wouldn't. She went out to look for Richard in the neighborhood. Maybe someone knew where he was living now. She visited the small market where Richard used to shop, the corner pharmacy, the local bakery. Everywhere, people confirmed they knew him, but no one knew his current address. "The last time I saw him was 2 weeks ago," said Mr. Baker, the bakery owner. "He was very thin, seemed to be struggling. He only bought a loaf of bread and asked if I knew any cheap places to rent a room. Did you? I mentioned Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house over on Maple Street, but I don't know if he went there. Deborah wrote down the address and decided to check. Maple Street was about a 20-minute walk from their building. Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house was an old 2-story building with peeling paint and a small sign on the door. Deborah rang the bell and was greeted by an elderly woman with grey hair and a tired expression. "Good afternoon, I'm looking for a man named Richard. Tall, thin, has a dog." "Oh, Richard," said Mrs. Jenkins. "Yes, he's staying here, but he doesn't have a dog." "Can I speak with him?" "He left early today. Said he was looking for work downtown. He won't be back until evening." Deborah left a message asking Richard to contact her. She gave the phone number of their neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, since she didn't have a phone herself. All that week, Deborah anxiously waited for Richard's call, but he never phoned. The following Saturday, Timmy and Deborah made another visit to the shelter. Duke was noticeably thinner despite the staff's care. "How is he?" asked Timmy, worried. "Physically, he's fine," replied Mrs. Patterson. "But emotionally, I think he's losing hope." Timmy hugged Duke tighter than usual. "Don't give up, Duke. I know Mr. Richard still loves you. Sometimes people go through tough times and do things they don't mean to." Duke rested his head on Timmy's chest and stayed like that for long minutes, as if absorbing all the love the boy had to offer. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. That week at school, Timmy was more distracted than usual. During math class, instead of solving problems, he kept drawing dogs in his notebook. "Timmy," called Mrs. Thompson. "Is everything okay? You seem worried about something." "It's Duke, ma'am. He's getting sadder and sadder." "Duke, the dog you visited at the shelter?" "Yes. I visit him every Saturday, but it's not enough. He needs his owner." Mrs. Thompson walked over to Timmy's desk. "And you couldn't find his owner?" "My mom tried, but it seems like he doesn't want to be found." "Why do you think that?" Timmy grew thoughtful. "My mom said he lost his job and doesn't have money to take care of Duke. Maybe he thinks Duke will be better off without him." "And do you think that's true?" "No. Duke is only happy with me because I remind him of Mr. Richard. But I'm not his real owner." Mrs. Thompson sat in the desk next to Timmy. "You know, sometimes adults make decisions they think are right, but they're actually wrong. Maybe this man needs to understand that Duke needs him no matter what. But how can I do that? I'm just a kid. Kids sometimes do things adults can't. You see the world more simply and clearly." Those words echoed in Timmy's mind all day. That night he had an idea. What if he wrote a letter to Mr. Richard? He took a sheet of paper and began writing in his careful child's handwriting. "Dear Mr. Richard, my name is Timmy, your neighbor from apartment 302. I knew you and Duke from your morning walks. I wanted to say Duke is very sad at the shelter. He doesn't understand why you left. I visit him every Saturday, and when he sees me, he's happy because I remind him of you. But I'm not you. Duke needs his daddy. I know you're going through hard times, like my dad did when he had to work far away. But Duke doesn't care if you have money or not. He just wants to be with you. Please go get Duke. He's waiting. Your friend, Timmy." The next day, Timmy asked his mom to take him to Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house. Deborah read the letter and was moved by her son's sincerity. "Are you sure you want to deliver this?" "Yes, Duke needs Mr. Richard, and Mr. Richard needs to know that." When they arrived at the boarding house, Mrs. Jenkins greeted them with a smile. "You're back. Richard heard you came looking for him. He said he'd call, but he hasn't yet." "Can we leave a letter for him?" Timmy asked. "Of course, sweetheart." Timmy handed over the letter, carefully folded, and asked Mrs. Jenkins to give it to Mr. Richard personally. Over the next few days, Timmy anxiously waited for a response. But days passed, and nothing happened. On Saturday, when they visited Duke again, Timmy noticed the dog was even more listless. He barely lifted his head when he saw them arrive. "Duke, what's wrong? Aren't you happy to see me?" The dog slowly approached, but without his usual excitement. It was as if he'd given up hope. "Mrs. Patterson, is Duke sick?" asked Timmy, worried. "Physically, no, but he's falling into a deep depression. It's common in animals who've gone through traumatic abandonment." "What does that mean?" Mrs. Patterson hesitated before answering. "It means he's losing the will to live." Timmy felt the world spin around him. He'd never thought Duke could simply give up on living. "But is there anything we can do? The only thing that would really help is if he were reunited with his owner, or if he found a new family who could give him lots of love and patience." That night, Timmy cried into his pillow. He felt he'd failed Duke, that he hadn't been able to help him when he needed it most. On Monday at school, Timmy was inconsolable. Ashley noticed her friend was deeply sad. "What happened, Timmy?" "Duke is giving up on living, and I don't know what else to do." "You've already done way more than any adult would. You can't give up now." "But what else can I do? I've already written a letter. I've looked for his owner. I'm just a kid." Ashley grew thoughtful. "My grandma always says that when we do things with our heart, the universe conspires to help." "What do you mean?" "Maybe you just need to try one more time, but this time, do something that truly comes from the heart." Timmy didn't fully understand what Ashley meant, but her words planted a seed in his mind. That afternoon, when he got home, he found his mother talking to Mrs. Wilson in the hallway. The two women seemed agitated. "What's going on?" Timmy asked. "It's about Mr. Richard," Mrs. Wilson replied. "Mrs. Jenkins called me earlier. She said he read your letter." Timmy's heart raced. "And what did he say?" "According to her, he cried a lot after reading it, but he said he can't take Duke back because he can't provide a decent life for an animal. But Duke doesn't care about that. He just wants to be with his owner." "I know, sweetheart," Deborah said, "but sometimes adults see things differently." Timmy felt a wave of frustration. Why did adults make simple things so complicated? That night, Timmy had a different idea. Instead of trying to convince Mr. Richard with words, maybe he could show him how much Duke was suffering. "Mom, can I ask Mr. Richard to come with me to visit Duke at the shelter?" "What do you mean, honey?" "If he sees how sad Duke is, maybe he'll understand they need to be together." Deborah grew thoughtful. It was an interesting idea, but how could they convince a grown man to do that? "I don't know if he'd go, Timmy. From what I understand, he's been avoiding any contact with Duke. But it's worth trying, isn't it?" The next day, Deborah returned to Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house. This time, she was lucky. Mr. Richard was there. When Mrs. Jenkins called him over, Deborah was shocked by the man's appearance. He was visibly thinner, unshaven, and wearing wrinkled clothes. In his eyes was a deep sadness Deborah recognized, the same sadness she saw in Duke's eyes. "You're the mother of the boy who wrote the letter?" Mr. Richard asked hoarsely. "I am. My son, Timmy." "Tell him I'm very grateful for the letter, but I can't do what he's asking." "Why not?" Mr. Richard sighed heavily. "Because I don't even have enough money to take care of myself, let alone a big dog. Duke deserves better than a failed owner." "Mr. Richard, can I say something? My son has visited Duke every Saturday for over a month, and I can promise you Duke doesn't care if you have money or not. He just wants to be with you. I know that, but love doesn't pay for vet bills or buy food or cover rent for a place that allows pets." Deborah saw in Mr. Richard's eyes that he was suffering just as much as Duke. "Would you like to come with me and my son to visit Duke at the shelter? Just once?" "I can't. It'll be worse for him to see me and then have to leave again." "Maybe not. Maybe seeing how Duke is doing might change your mind." Richard shook his head. "I won't change my mind. I'm not in a position to." Deborah went home feeling disheartened. It seemed Richard had made up his mind for good, even if it was destroying both him and Duke. On Saturday, Timmy and Deborah visited the shelter again. This time, Duke barely came out of his kennel when he saw them arrive. "Duke," Timmy called out, worried. "Don't you want to play with me?" The dog approached slowly, but it was clear he had no energy to show excitement. "Mrs. Patterson, he's getting worse, isn't he?" Deborah asked. "Yes. Yesterday he refused to eat anything. I'm considering taking him to the vet to see if he needs medication for depression." Timmy knelt beside Duke and hugged the dog's furry neck. "Duke, I won't give up on you. I promise I'll find a way to help you." Duke rested his head on Timmy's shoulder, and the boy could feel the dog trembling, not from cold but from sadness. That's when Timmy had the boldest idea of his life. "Mom, if we can't bring Mr. Richard to Duke, why don't we bring Duke to Mr. Richard?" "What do you mean, Timmy?" "We can ask Mrs. Patterson to let Duke leave the shelter for a few hours. Then we'll take him to the boarding house where Mr. Richard is staying." Deborah was stunned by her son's suggestion. "Honey, that's not possible. Duke can't just leave the shelter like that." "Why not? If we promise to bring him back." Mrs. Patterson, who had overheard the conversation, stepped closer. "Actually, there's a program we call therapeutic outings. For animals with depression, we sometimes allow trusted individuals to take them out for a few hours." "Really?" Timmy asked, his eyes shining. "But it's only for people we're considering as potential adopters, and Duke would have to wear a special leash with a tracking chip." Deborah saw the hope in her son's eyes and felt her heart tighten. She didn't want to give him false expectations. "Mrs. Patterson, we can't adopt Duke. Would it be fair to participate in this program? Well, you've been visiting him religiously for over a month. That shows real commitment and love. Maybe we could make an exception given Duke's critical condition." Timmy grabbed his mother's hands. "Please, Mom, it's our last chance to help Duke." Deborah looked at her son, then at Duke, who lay on the floor with a defeated expression. Maybe it was worth a try. "All right, let's do it." An hour later, Timmy was walking down the street with Duke by his side. The dog wore a special collar with a small electronic device and a red leash, indicating he was a shelter animal. At IET, first Duke walked slowly, uninterested in his surroundings, but gradually the movement and the sense of the street seemed to awaken something in him. "Look, Duke," Timmy said, pointing to a tree. "Remember this tree? You always peed. Here when you walked with Mr. Richard." Duke stopped and sniffed the tree. For a moment his eyes flickered with recognition. When they reached Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house, Timmy took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "Mrs. Jenkins, we brought Duke to see Mr. Richard." She looked at the dog, and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my goodness. Poor thing. He's so thin." "Is Mr. Richard here?" Deborah asked. "Yes, he is. I'll call him." A few minutes later, Richard came down the stairs. When his eyes met Duke's, the man froze. Duke, seeing his owner, reacted instantly. He began whining and pulling at the leash, trying to reach Richard. "Duke," whispered Richard, his voice choked with emotion. The dog managed to slip free from Timmy's hands and ran to his owner, jumping on him and desperately licking his face. Richard fell to his knees and hugged Duke, both of them seemingly crying. The man buried his face in the dog's neck, and Duke kept making little sounds of joy mixed with whimpers. "I missed you so much," Richard murmured. So much." Duke wouldn't stop licking Richard's face, as if trying to make sure this wasn't a dream. Timmy and Deborah watched the scene, deeply moved. It was clear those two loved each other deeply and had suffered from being apart. "Mr. Richard," said Timmy, stepping closer, "Duke doesn't care if you have money or not. He just wants to be with you." Richard looked at the boy, tears streaming down his face. "I know, kiddo, but I can't give him a good life." "What good life?" asked Timmy with the frankness of a child. "He's been dying of sadness at the shelter. How is that a good life?" Deborah stepped forward too. "Mr. Richard, may I suggest something? Why don't you talk to Mrs. Patterson at the shelter? Maybe they have some assistance program for people going through financial difficulties." Richard kept holding Duke, who wouldn't stop showing his joy. "I can't give him false hope again." "It won't be false hope," said Timmy. "It'll be real love. My mom always says when you truly love someone, you find a way to stay together." Duke seemed to understand the conversation. He stopped licking Richard and sat beside him, pressing his body against his owner's as if saying, "I'm here. We can face anything together." Richard looked at Duke, then at Timmy, then at Deborah. "Do you really think this could work?" "We'll only know if we try," Timmy replied. At that moment, Duke did something he hadn't done in weeks. He barked, a strong, happy bark, as if agreeing with Timmy. Everyone laughed, and for the first time in a long while, hope filled the air. "All right," Richard finally said. Let's go to the shelter and talk to this Mrs. Patterson. The walk back to the shelter was completely different from the way there. Duke moved with renewed energy, stopping to sniff everything, wagging his tail, and constantly looking at Richard, as if making sure he wouldn't disappear again. When they arrived, Mrs. Patterson was surprised to see Richard. "You must be Duke's owner," she said immediately. "It's amazing how he's changed just by being near you." "I'm Richard, and yes, Duke is my best friend, or was, before I messed everything up." "You didn't mess up. You hit a rough patch. It happens to everyone." Richard explained his financial situation to Mrs. Patterson, who listened carefully. "Mr. Richard, we have a program called Assisted Adoption. It's for people who have an emotional bond with an animal, but are going through temporary hardships. How does it work? The shelter provides food and basic veterinary care for 6 months while the person gets back on their feet. The only requirement is that the animal has a loving home." Richard looked at Duke, who sat beside him, resting his snout on his leg. "And you do this for Duke?" "For Duke and that boy over there," said Mrs. Patterson, pointing at Timmy. "In over 20 years working with abandoned animals, I've never seen a child so dedicated to an animal that wasn't even his." Timmy blushed but smiled proudly. "Duke isn't just mine," the boy said. "He's Mr. Richard's. I was just taking care of him until you two found each other again." 2 hours later, Richard left the city animal shelter with Duke by his side, carrying a bag with food, medicine, and a basic care kit. "Duke is officially in assisted adoption," explained Mrs. Patterson. "In 6 months, we'll reassess the situation." Duke wouldn't stop jumping for joy. It was as if he understood he could finally go home with his owner. "Mr. Richard," said Timmy as they were saying goodbye, "can you bring Duke to visit me sometimes?" "Of course, Timmy. In fact, I'd like you to be Duke's godfather. After all, you saved his life." Timmy beamed. "Godfather? Really?" "Really. And the godfather's first job is to help us find a place to live that accepts pets." Deborah offered to help with the search, and Mrs. Wilson did too. It was as if the whole neighborhood had come together to help Duke and Richard stay together. A week later, Richard and Duke moved into a small apartment at the back of a house, 3 blocks from the building where Timmy lived. The rent was cheap because the landlady, Mrs. Henderson, was a widowed woman who loved animals. "You can stay as long as you need," said Mrs. Henderson. "It's nice to have life in the house again." Richard got a job as a night janitor at a small residential complex. It wasn't his dream job, but it let him spend his days with Duke and have a steady income. Every Saturday, instead of visiting Duke at the shelter, Timmy now visited Duke and Richard at their new home. The 3 became great friends, and Duke seemed to have completely regained his joy for life. "You know, Timmy," Richard said during one of these visits as Duke played in the small but cozy backyard, "you taught me something really important." "What?" "That sometimes we think we're protecting the ones we love by walking away, but really, we're just causing more pain." "Duke never doubted that you loved him," Timmy said. "He just didn't understand why you were apart. And you were the bridge that brought us back together." Timmy smiled and called Duke, who came running and jumped into his lap, knocking him onto the grass. The 3 laughed, and in that moment, everything felt right in the world. 6 months later, when the assisted adoption period ended, Richard was financially stable enough to care for Duke completely on his own. But he never forgot the help he'd received from the shelter and decided to become a volunteer, helping other animals in similar situations. Timmy remained Duke's official godfather and also became a junior volunteer at the shelter, helping other abandoned animals find new hope. "You know what the most amazing thing about this whole story is?" Deborah asked her son one Sunday afternoon, as they watched Duke and Richard playing in the yard. "What, Mom?" "That you, a 7-year-old boy, saw a solution all the adults thought was impossible. Sometimes adults just think too much. I just thought Duke and Mr. Richard loved each other and deserved to be together." Deborah hugged her son, proud of the wisdom he showed. "And you were right. Love always finds a way." Duke, as if he'd heard the conversation, came running to Timmy and dropped the beige cap at his feet, the same cap the boy had used to comfort the dog on his first day at the shelter. "He still remembers," Richard said, moved. Duke never forgot you were the first person to show you cared about him when I couldn't be there. Timmy picked up the cap and placed it on Duke's head, just as he had that day at the shelter. Now, you don't need it to remember you're loved, Duke. You have your dad back. Duke shook his head, sending the cap flying, and barked happily. But this time, instead of returning the beige cap to Timmy, he took it to Richard, as if introducing the godfather to the dad. I think Duke wants us to be a family, said Richard, laughing. We already are, replied Timmy. A very different kind of family, but a family. And so the dog, who had been driven mad with grief over losing his owner, not only found his way back home, but also gained a special godfather who proved that a child's love can move mountains and reunite hearts that seemed lost forever. From that day on, every Saturday morning, Duke would wake up knowing he would see both his dad Richard and his godfather Timmy. And in the eyes of that golden German shepherd, there was never sadness again, only the pure joy of one who knows. He is deeply loved by people who fought to bring him back to life. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story of Duke, Richard, and Timmy. What moved you the most? Have you ever been through a similar situation with a pet? Share your experiences with us in the comments and leave a like if the story touched your heart. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.